Hello, good evening, and welcome to my personal channel, where I'm going to be reading a little bit of the recent book that I have. Although, just to get everybody sort of up to speed, I am going to have to quite possibly retweet this thing so that people will know that we are now live. And then there we go, nice and posted. Okay. Well, since no one's checked in yet, I'm going to get a couple of people trickling in soon. Let's enjoy a little bit of tea while we wait for everyone. Now, obviously, my teacup is ludicrously large, but I don't want to have to get up in the middle to make a second one. And there's never enough tea in one mug, is there? I don't know if you can hear this at the moment, but I have two very small little children being tortured in the bathroom over there with soap. So you might be interrupted. We might be interrupted just shortly as they go past on their way to the bedroom. Anyway, what was I going to go and start with? Oh yes, my book. So now this little book that I've written is, well, it's not a little book. It's about 350 pages. And if you're an international viewer and you're sort of hoping that this is going to be full of all of the horrors and sort of grim stuff that everyone wants to say about South Africa, ooh, look how we're being oppressed. Look, everyone's done that to death. I'm not here to litigate the minutiae of, racial discrimination, all of that. I'm talking about, okay, from the perspective of the parliamentary system, that is national, provincial, local government, elected councils. That's the parliamentary system. From the perspective of the parliamentary system, what is actually being done and what can be done with the major representative minorities in South Africa? Like, are they winning? Can they win? Can they fix things? And I think, look, from the representative position they have, and they could be doing a hell of a lot more. But they're up against a sort of brick wall, and they can, at the best, they can kind of buy us a bit of time. There's some parts of the country where they might be able to temporarily reverse some of the changes. But broadly speaking, the institution that is the DA is very, very old. If you take into account all the different rebrands, mergers, splits, and all of the things that's gone on over its history, this is a party that started 130 years ago, in 1896 in the Cape Colony as the South African Party. And there's a whole chapter where I go into that history and who did what, and basically they've been a tool of the Oppenheimer family since the year dot. Since about the 20s ish. And before then, the Schreiner family, who were by all accounts Fabian socialists. So there's a sort of like very left liberal establishmentarian sort of thing going on. And they're not actually that radically against the ANC. Obviously, I mean, I'm not a fool enough to think that they don't have objections to what the ANC is doing in various ways. But I don't think that even in the best cases, they're particularly radically opposed to them. And so what I spend a lot of time in this book doing is trying to prove this to people, because you have no idea. If you're not from South Africa, you will not have any idea how much of a cult-like following this party has, because everyone can see what it looks like when an African country sort of goes over the edge. And there's no other option that minorities can look to and say, okay, there's a realistic alternative right there. So, when people vote, they vote blue and they vote hard, because it's like, this is the only way. And so there's a kind of rictus grin enthusiasm you get from people. And I'm not going to go into it too much, but there's a sort of little triangle. There's a driepoort thing, like a little, sorry, driepoort. If you're aware of this in South Africa, you get these sort of little black cauldrons that sit on three legs that you can make fire, and it's sort of like it used to be standard fare until electricity was widespread, but you'll still find some more traditional people who like outdoor camping doing this. Anyway, so there's three little points that the DA likes resting their message on. Now, they're not going to like me saying this, and this is perhaps a bit unfair. But number one is swart gevaar. That would be, this is what the old Nationalist Party used to talk about, the threat of black majoritarianism, right? So they'll say, "Ooh, be scared of the ANC, be scared of the EFF, be very, very scared." This is number one. And number two is their position where they say, actually, no, also rainbow nationism. So they're trying to give you both messages at the same time. Be scared of the black majority, but also believe in the rainbow nation, that all races can kumbaya and hold hands together. And once you notice this, there's this beautiful schizophrenia to their public communication. And the third leg of this is that they're, competence and cleanliness, right? So no corruption, no cock-ups. Now, compared to the ANC, almost anyone would pass this sort of test. But, the DA have their little slip-ups. And I think by many standards overseas, they'd be seen as a bit dodgy. But yeah, no, I mean, I wrote this book. Some of it, involves there's two parts to it. So the first part is me laying out sort of the national level and systemic arguments and the historical stuff. And then the second half of the book is me going into like local politics, which sounds dull on the face of it. But this is where I found sort of a fair number of corruption stories. And now, not everything is about corruption stories. Some of it's about, mismanagement that's not even the DA's fault. Just, bad things happening in big metros around the country and problems that just can't be solved. And what I spent a lot of time doing in part two is saying, okay, look, here's the ANC, the DA in government. And here is how they deal with their own members when they're corrupt or abusing power or whatever. And generally speaking, it was very, very difficult to make this point to people. And there's 2 points that I make in that section, which is, number one, they don't really punish them. And they even protect and promote people that get caught with their fingers in the till repeatedly. But also, it's that when they take over an ANC municipality, they don't fix it. Especially the big metros, and they had a good opportunity in 2016. They got into 4 metros. The reason they couldn't fix it is twofold. Number one, obviously, coalitions, unstable partners, the usual thing. Everyone's heard it. But the second point is more important. They didn't really clean house. They didn't put people in to the top management layer whose job it was everyone that was in every department. And if you don't do that, you're stuck with ANC cadres. I mean, what you really need to do is set to avoid some of the labor laws. You just sort of set a really, really obscenely hard to meet set of criteria for job performance, and then you do mass layoffs. And because you're doing mass layoffs, it's no longer personal. It's sort of systemic. But I digress. I don't really get into all of the how to fix things there. This is just about making a very simple argument. The DA doesn't have what it takes to save South Africa. And now I'm just going to read you the foreword and the first chapter. And some of this will be a little bit out of date because I wrote this a couple of months ago. And there have been a number of scandals that have hit the DA since. And I made a last-ditch attempt before I published it to try and update a couple of the points. But right now, they're sitting with the guy there in the finance committee, Mark Burke, getting caught for, well, I mean, we don't know if it's true yet. He has to be investigated, but that nominally He's been caught for sort of violating regulations on forex trading. And like what they're alleging is like, okay, he hid crypto trading behind the forex trading. And the company is nominally run by his brother, but there's an insinuation that he's actually still running it. So there's a conflict of interest story. Then there's also a story about him donating to the party and then very soon after being made an MP. And so there's a lot of questions around what's really happening here. And also his ties with the party go back to 2012, 2013. And there's some odd sort of, social circle links with the leadership from when he was younger, I should say. He's still young, which raise eyebrows in a number of ways. But, remains to be seen how the DA will handle this. They withdrew him. In, to some, it looks like an admission of guilt. Some, it looks like complying with a step aside rule. I don't know. It just looks bad, and that's not even the last of what's happened. So let me just start. This book offers a single argument, which I will summarize here in outline. The rest of the book is just evidence and justification. I have delayed writing it for about as long as I can tolerate, but with local elections coming up and limited time to prepare for the deluge of 2029, I think I should probably get my backside in gear. The DA cannot save South Africa. The biggest reason is the racial voting patterns in the country. 95% of black South Africans vote for charterist parties. Now, charterists refers to the ANC and its breakaway parties, so-called because of their foundation upon the Freedom Charter of 1955. And these occupy 2/3 of the National Assembly. I suppose we could speculate until doomsday about why it is the case, but it simply is a fact. 90 blacks any party that cannot be described as some kind of black nationalist. Like the maths will be coming below, and I assure you it is not. As a consequence, the DA are caught in a series of dilemmas. They can't compete with the ANC for black votes without losing their minority base. They cannot pursue radical reforms that would protect their voters from their coalition partners without losing support from their donors who like the status quo. Well, certain aspects of it anyway. They can't oppose the ANC without risking their place in government, and they can't keep working risking minority support. But they're also vital for the survival of the status quo. If they cannot convince racial minorities, whose vote they virtually monopolize, that there is some hope of winning, the state would lose a crucial element of its legitimacy. Minorities would cease to look to Parliament for any kind of moderate solution, and whites retreating from the system would risk loss of tax revenue. But they have been static or declining, at least in absolute terms, at the ballot box for 20 years. More if you count them as continuous with the NP from whom they inherited their constituency. Luckily, it's been splitting, so they can use the EFF and MK as a bogeyman to scare minorities into supporting continued government by the ANC. But this also means having to justify the ANC's behavior. You have now made a doomsday threat to keep yourselves in an impotent cabinet seat and do not have the option of going back to being an impotent opposition party, because then what are you for? These are all strategic questions, but then there are also institutional questions, competence and corruption. After a couple of years of digging into local municipal governance in the Western Cape, I found that outside the city itself, corruption is pretty easy to uncover. And invariably, the DA has made an effort to cover it up and reward or at least protect the perpetrators, unless the police gets to them first. This has led to some key failures in infrastructure and some simple problems they just can't seem to patch, though nothing catastrophic in most places. But despite the relatively mild forms of corruption seen there, it has created profound structural vulnerabilities in the party itself and eroded the meritocracy they so celebrate, because it chases away a lot of good people and trains members to defend political malpractice instead of rooting it out. Additionally, the DA have spent 20 years trying to outflank the ANC from the left by aping all of their key local policies to disastrous effect and have refused to exploit any legal loopholes to reject policies. In point of fact, they've outpaced the rest of the country in land invasions with their urban upgrading policy and actively endorsed and even voted in Parliament for BEE and employment equity until 2019. Where they have had an opportunity to take over big cities outside the Cape, they've botched all four opportunities by trying to ingratiate themselves with cadres in the municipal staff who had nothing but contempt for them and suffered sabotage, looting, and delays, which caused voters to ditch them again in 2021. The strangest discovery is that they consciously planned to merge purposes with the ANC from as early as 2012, even supporting racial quotas for several years to try and attract black voters. The worst part is that we are now facing completely unsustainable and unpayable national debts, which would require a Lee Kuan Yew style economic miracle to solve, or a historical bailout from either America or China. And when that bubble pops, the cadres will still need to eat. And if they can't get the milk, they will eat beef. To elucidate this tortured metaphor, when the state can no longer use taxes to feed patronage networks and debt servicing costs, they will resort to more drastic measures, such as quantitative easing, a euphemism for spaffing money at the economy, or asset seizures, whether through unrealized gains taxes or expropriation without compensation. It may be a cliche, but the party is coming to an end. There are indeed solutions, and some are fun, some are hard work. But even in the best of case scenario, saving any part of South Africa will be a gamble, and one that will require ditching any high ideals, focusing on hard pragmatics, and steeling ourselves for long odds. This means achieving a decentralized government through asymmetric means, leveraging loopholes in the law or extra-legal challenges to the constitution, such as secession, to wrest power away from Pretoria and protect parts of the economy, territory, and population that can be safeguarded from political overreach. I'm going to take a sip now. Oh, my throat is unheimlich dry. Ah, my goodness. With new centres of autonomous power, Pretoria will no longer be able to dictate terms and will be forced to behave itself. I believe it can be done, but only if the DA change very radically or are rejected at the ballot box in favour of more radical conservative options. While many fear the loss of a stable majority for the DA in many areas, what constitutes stable government is not determined entirely by an absolute majority, but rather in responsible consultation with trustworthy partners. The DA has behaved unreasonably with some of their partners, even if a few of them can be said to deserve it. Now, here I'm referring to Herman Mashaba, who is a prize-winning fool. And and he got very, very thoroughly stabbed in the back a year before last. And then turned around and did some stabbing of his own. But none of the damage really lasted on either side. And he's just sort of whining at the DA from the sidelines in an ever more unhinged way. The DA has behaved unreasonably with some of their partners. Partners in the Vryheidsplus and the ACDP, who can be relied on to maintain clean and responsible government. And to a lesser extent, the IFP and KZN have already shown to be a decent bulwark against charterist excesses. If the DA could just show a more conciliatory approach to traditional leadership and bring them into a creative reform and development process, they could help facilitate a new political order in Zululand, which permanently imposes barriers on central overreach through local development. Now, just to make a little point about that before I move on to the actual opening chapter, that was the introduction. The Zulu traditional areas, they have a large amount of power, and they hold these little. The monarchy holds an enormous trust. He owns a bit of land that's almost the size of Wales, and all of the other traditional leaders in KwaZulu, they form a little hierarchy. There's traditional councils. They own the land in these areas, and they have special powers, sort of quasi-judicial powers, as well as very, very strict powers over land use. and so the main problem thing that we have going over there is it's just like a fantastic opportunity to do all kinds of weird little investment projects and so on, but none of them are really taking advantage of the opportunities they have. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on there. And then the DA, instead of like going, okay, look, KZN is an important province, let's get in with the traditional leadership, they keep doing this thing of saying, oh, it's so unfair. Our traditional leaders have all this power over their people. They should actually have all of their holdings liquidated and everyone being given freehold status. And like any fool can understand what happens to to sort of, freeholder consolidation in Africa in the modern day. It results in either commercial development sales or gradual partition and the destruction of the use value of the land. So it's like it doesn't actually it results in the complete smashing of these communities overnight. But that would be great for the labor market. So great, a whole nother bunch of deracinated young men who've had their community ties cut. It's not very smart, but number go up, right? Anyway, so the first chapter I present is called The Present Crisis, and it's kind of just trying to say, well, okay, what is the DA facing right now? It's a bit long, but hopefully it kind of makes sense as a little package. I open with a quote from Gareth van Onselen. The fact is, if the DA is able to win some meaningful and stable control over Johannesburg and does a full audit of the water situation, the result will be a request for R1 trillion investment, and South Africa can't afford that. So in the long term, it's all downhill from here, whoever wins. Now, that was Gareth van Onselen on X on the 7th of February this year. If it weren't tweeted out by some errant right-wing pessimist, it would be easy to dismiss. But this is an admission from the heart of the DA that they have lost faith in their own project. Now, everyone knows the ANC can't save South Africa. Certainly the MK and EFF won't. But the real question is whether it is even possible to clean up the mess they've all made of the country. And to answer that question, we need to talk about the DA. Gareth van Onselen has been doing polling for the DA for many years and is the country's premier pollster. He's close friends with many DA insiders and has a dogmatic adherence to their core political viewpoint, known for sparring energetically and sometimes vitriolically with the DA's critics on social media. From close observation of these characters, the backroom operators of the DA, one can get a lot of insight. For example, from Tony Leon, Ryan Coetzee, Nick Cleland, whose writing and public utterances to official whose intimate involvement in shaping policy, public relations, research, and coalition negotiations make them central figures, and a rare keyhole into the inner machinery, unclouded by the vagaries of public commentary. They tend to make strong rebukes of any radical solutions to the country's interminable woes and will morally castigate their rightward critics, though they are happy to advertise how well they compete to meet ANC policy objectives. But when push comes to shove, they often cannot bring themselves to believe in the success of their own vision. And Johannesburg is the greatest test of this vision, that any part of the country can be saved by a DA government. And nobody doubts that Helen Zille stands a serious chance of winning the mayoralty of the country's most important city, but what is in profound question is her ability to fix it. Now, the DA has already failed to turn around major metropolitan municipalities: Tshwane, Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela Bay, and Ekurhuleni. Whether one blames the presence of ANC cadres in municipal staff, the long-term destruction by ANC governance, or the chaos of coalition negotiations, the bottom line is not whether the DA has good excuses for failing to deliver. There's a good argument that in several cases they were beset by insurmountable challenges, but instead whether they can get the job done. In national government, the DA has shown extremely underwhelming results, indulged in strange global governance obsessions, and capitulated to the ANC in areas where there was no need to. This is not even to mention the profound invidiousness of John Steenhuisen's agricultural policies, or the corrupt way in which his paycheck was preserved. Meanwhile, cracks are showing in the Western Cape too. after decades of managed decline and prioritization of central party control and public perception over merit and quality oversight. Old corruption sagas left a lasting mark on the infrastructure and public management systems, which, while not as severe as that of the ANC, are becoming noticeable. And their policy of incentivizing land invasions with free utilities and title deeds has made it the worst performing province for formalized housing, covering the landscape with 1 million people, of whom no more than single digit percentage points will ever vote for the DA. But this simmering dissatisfaction was all contained to local grievances until quite recently. Steenhuisen's catastrophic mismanagement of the agricultural department and implementation of ANC race policies have badly tarnished the party's image, as has his finger pointing at Tony Leon's lobby group Resolve Communications. It's clear that Steenhuisen has been a disaster and has been a lightning rod for the party's failures in government, but as we shall see, there's no reason to believe his replacements will do much for ordinary South Africans besides more ruthlessly implementing ANC policy. This whole mess with Steenhuisen is a bit of a relief on incoming leader Jordan Hill-Lewis's reputation. He was on track to be thought of as a real lefty after pushing for aggressive and often illegal measures to redistribute wealth and impose vast rent-controlled apartment developments on the city of Cape Town. Now he's getting attacked by all the right people to dispel that image. Jordan Hill-Lewis has proved to be a profoundly dishonest public communicator, finding spurious pretexts to attack the Vryheidsfront Plus, their only meaningful competition for the white vote, even openly lying to do so. He has also defended allowing land invaders to build as they please, implementing vast and aggressive development plans for rent-controlled apartment blocks and calling all critics racists. Now, the ANC policy is without a doubt wrecking the country. Judging by estimates from leading economists like Andre Divenach and Davy Rood, the country is heading for a fiscal cliff, and all the required changes they have proposed have proven to be politically impossible. Within a decade, we'll be staring down the barrel of an unprecedented fiscal crisis, while at the same time reeling from the collapse of the local industry, infrastructure, law and order, education, and basic services. The legal profession is stuffed with Mugabeist radicals, and the legislation passed under Ramaphosa will, when it is all fully implemented, create a vast and unaccountable centrally planned black national socialist government, choking minorities and private enterprise out of the economy. By my own crude estimates from a few years ago, South Africa had until between 2028 and 2035 before it is hit with a fiscal crisis caused by unsustainable spending. I was happy to see that I'm now joined by actual respectable institutional voices now too, like Andre Divenach and Davy Rood, who use much more sophisticated analyses than I do. I just projected existing fiscal trends forward within reasonable parameters until they hit Bernholt's ratio. One must understand the Laffer curve to understand why squeezing the public for more is stupid. The science behind it can be a bit fuzzy, let's be honest, as is all economic modeling. But the basic idea is that if the state takes zero tax, they get zero revenue. But if they draw 100% tax, they also get no revenue because nobody can afford to do anything in the economy. So the optimum necessarily sits somewhere between the two. Very few studies have been done on South Africa in this regard, but the last one I found from 2009 showed the optimum tax rate over GDP to be 18%. We are well on our way to 30% right now, and the margin is only increasing as economic growth stagnates. With a fiscal cliff looming, South Africa will have three choices: structural readjustment, that is retrenching the civil service, selling state assets, cutting welfare, defaulting its debt, or printing away the problem. Now, all three of these are going to be extremely nasty to live through. But the DA has no solutions and just wants us to worry about the EFF, who will bring about the same end anyway. So not even the DA can stomach any real cuts, as their government of the Northern Metros demonstrates. With the ANC and its splinter parties occupying 2/3 of the legislature, and decades of racial scapegoating empowering the worst elements of African society, the likely response to the coming fiscal crisis is all but sealed. But the DA refuse any form of meaningful change, radical or reformist, and defend the status quo more vigorously and agilely than anyone else. This is a tenuous position for both the country and for the party. Now, I'll leave you there because that's the end of that chapter. That sort of sums up where we are. Now, broadly speaking, And just sort of let me just go to the table of contents so I can give you an outline of what I discuss. So, where I follow from there is I cover public opinion. So that's like all of these different opinion polls on and voting results over time that demonstrate all, like how much. And it can be fiddly because if you want to press it one way or the other, you can kind of get a result that looks really, really cuddly, where everybody really just wants jobs and wants an end to crime, and everybody's chill with each other, and like all of the racial tension is a complete figment of the media's imagination. And I sort of think, well, look, to some degree it is because it's not as high a priority right now, but it doesn't mean it's not there. And so finding the right attitude polls, opinion polls that can really measure where it's sitting, where people's, regardless of how high the priority is, because always putting food on the table is always higher priority than dealing with political enemies or, ethnic grievances or whatever. But doesn't mean it's gone away. So finding exactly where that is was interesting. And again, it's things that Gareth van Onselen has done his own research on. But he's very good at wrapping up his results in a way that sort of say, well, let's not get too excited. And he's right to sort of say, let's not get too excited, up to a point, in the sense that what you got going there is, and I mean, Franz Cranier makes this point a lot. And if you don't know who Franz Cranier is, you should go and look how that's spelled. France, Frans, Cronje. That is of the Common Sense. It's a little online publication. Now, he is sort of the neocon South African establishment, sort of center-right type of thing. So critical of the DA and so on, but not as vociferously as me. But he makes the point a lot, and it's worth repeating that what happened. People do not actually want expropriation without compensation to come tomorrow necessarily. They have bigger fish to fry, and if the economy is doing well, they sort of like put that stuff way on the back burner. And so how people think about what is necessary and what needs to be done is different from what their actual base attitudes to whether they think it's right or wrong. And so I was fortunate enough to find polls, which I've shared elsewhere and so on many times, which show the actual attitudes to the given policy straight up. Like, do you think this is a good idea or not? And something like approaching 2/3 of the population are like, yeah, expropriation without compensation, that has to happen. So it has broad support. No one actually thinks it's a categorically bad idea. It's just that they think, well, what's more important, getting the land back or getting a job right now? And of course, getting a job right now. So this is generally speaking how people think about these political issues. They have to be borne in mind. And the other thing is, like, there's classic graphs I like sharing where it's like past 30 years and there's just like a green line on top for the charterists and a blue line like along the bottom for the minoritarian parties, and they just like barely move. They just sort of gently wiggle. This is just like a repeated thing that nothing changes. There's this incredible stasis where like absolutely nothing happens. The only thing that changes over time is that black voters get more and more apathetic. So we have an effective voting rate of like a quarter of the of the voting age population, and it's crazy. We're getting by with nothing, and so in the end of the day, we have white people voting somewhere between 1 and 2/3 to 2 times the rate of the rest of the population, because we're really keen on making sure that we're represented. And we end up being 12-13% of the voters roll when we're like 7% of the population. And I mean, this is confirmed by by sort of opinion polling. So there's like little points you can. It's not just that the census is undercounting us or anything. And so yeah, no, that's a big point I pick up on. I talk a lot about race and class, like okay, who votes for the DA, and how much of their performance can be chalked up to the demographics of the areas in which they govern. So how old is the population, how wealthy is the population, how big is the dependent population, and the areas are good places to govern, and so they look really stellar. And then you're going to ask, okay, so then how do they deal with Johannesburg? Well, they haven't dealt with it very well so far. They've had a chance. They had a chance with Trane for a very long time, hanging on by the skin of their teeth, and it hasn't fallen apart, but you haven't seen any of the promised miracles either. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff where I'm sort of going through all that. There's a good big long section where I talk about how did the ANC actually sabotage them when in the metropoles, and then I talk about how the party's values differ from its voting base, and all of their various experiments to try and expand that base to people who they think match their values or preferences or whatever. But I mean, how many people are really, UCT progressives, English speaking UCT progressives? It's a very small portion of the population. So, I mean, yeah. Anyway, because all their leadership are UCT, more English progressives, with some exceptions. Anyway, so I talk also about like the road to the GNU, talking about, okay, well, first of all, I try to go like, okay, how they to join the coalition with the ANC, and then I go, okay, well, it goes back to this here. This is the earliest sort of point where I can say the party has decided this is what it wants. Mainly because there are signs from the other sort of oligarchs in the country where there's like chatter around this time in 2013, and of course the person with the biggest mouth is Rob Hersov. So I followed him back, his public comments back, and then I found an interview with Helen Ziller with Chatham House, where she was like, okay, merge purposes with the ANC, implement their plans and policies, show that it can work, that's genuinely what she. I don't even know where to go with that, but yeah, and then sort of how they hid their intentions and all of their different sort of efforts. Governing is like, and there's all these little red lines that they said, oh, we're not going to increase VAT, we're not going to, implement the Bella Act, we're not, why do they have the Climate Change Act? And I go into a chapter explaining what exactly is going on with digital ID and CBDCs. Honestly, I'm not so sure this is something that can even be stopped, but I think it matters to kind of explain to people to some extent what tools the government are going to have in like 10 years time or whatever. And, especially how eager the DA are to implement them. And then I go into Steenhuisen and his nonsense and some of the ANCification. So what's happening as they absorb ANC and EFF members in the Cape, because Jordan Hill-Lewis has been doing a lot of recruiting of completely unreformed radical black nationalists who openly say, yeah, we're just going to continue implementing our ideas from within the DA. It's just really cynical. And then because we need more black faces so we can grow that. I mean, yeah, but what are you turning yourself into? So and then I've got a huge, the second part of the book from like page 200 onwards is the just stuff happening in metros, and so the thing about the Cape Town, why it's sustainable, how they're mismanaging what's called land invasions, and the main policy behind it, why Helen Ziller implemented it in 2006, and the degree to which it's allowed the Western Cape and Cape Town itself to become the worst in the country for land invasions. And then I've got like a story in Hessequa, which I had to clean up because I got when I first ran the story on the Cape Independent a couple of years ago, I got a legal challenge from the contractor involved. So I just chose to, for the sake of this, not mention the contractor, just focus on the story and the DA's involvement in it, because there was someone involved with the traffic ticketing contractor who's double ticketing motorists. And when this was discovered by the traffic department, they fired the whole traffic department. The traffic, the heads of the traffic department. So they fired all the traffic officers. There were only 10 of them for Hezekiah, which is a very big area. And then they brought in the heads of the department and they held them to a disciplinary hearing. And they said, "Oh, well, you've been very naughty. Here's a sideways promotion with no pay cut." And the municipal manager there called Albert de Klerk, there's a guy who's caught in a cash for jobs scandal in Midval years ago, gets bounced to Langeberg. Langeberg hears about this and say, "We don't want this guy. We think he's a crook." So they bounce him to Hesequa. And what he tells, I mean, yeah, so it's all about that kind of stuff with accountability and so on. Drakenstein, similar story, mainly centered around a waste to energy plant where they inflated the price by a factor of 6. And then Stellenbosch is a difficult one because that is a crazy story. It's the water department fired every single white technician. Then and like there's all of the stuff with, like, you know, you got municipal capture and so on. Where it's sort of become a situation where there's zero council oversight. Almost like a see over everything that happens in the municipal civil service, and no one in council is allowed to know what's going on under any circumstances. There's no oversight. And I mean, like, I got open admission that this is what they were doing from the former. I think was she head of corporate services? I can't remember what it is, Annalene de Beer. Like, she openly admitted, "No, we don't give out any information to, you know." She said she like defended the decision for some reason, and then I asked her, "Yeah, but can you remember just like can you say that you remember even one time that you've ever allowed a member of the council to meet with a member of staff or handed information that was requested to it?" She couldn't recall a single time. Like, not even to tell me that they did it once. Like, try. I mean, you could. Anyway. And then and then the next one I look at is it was Garden Route, because there Helen Ziller was directly involved. And now I personally can't sort of paint any decision saying, okay, well, she did this, but she was looped into a process where only her and the head of the MEC for local government in the Western Cape were a corruption story. And immediately there was like fabricated late dues fees they used to expel the speaker from their party because he complained internally, not even to the press. It's like really crazy stuff. Like, I mean, look, for the DA, I mean, look, for the ANC, this is a party that like members assassinate each other, right? Mr. Moose, it wasn't Stellies where the leaked audio video came out of them not wanting to hire a single white person. Yeah, that was me who leaked it. It was me who leaked it. Yeah, it took them ages to get rid of that guy. No one actually wanted to get rid of him until it was really bad. And but in the end, I got my fingers burned because a senior member of the DA in Stellenbosch invited me out to talk. Fed some solid information and then a whole bunch of nonsense. And so I got sued for the nonsense. And so they got me to remove the article, as well as all the stuff that I said that was true had to be removed as well. And I had to claim, I had to disavow it, everything, even the stuff that was true. And I couldn't find a single lawyer to represent me. because I don't have any money. So, yeah, that was slightly humiliating and well played on their part, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, that's very sad because the main story was, mismanagement of the property portfolio. They basically they'd made vast majority of their property portfolio extra vires, property transactions in the with the municipality since I think 2018, 2019. Huge portion of them were ultra vires because they were handling it directly through the mayoral committee instead of through council. It's going to come out eventually, as will their problems with the northern water feed, because they have no telemetry equipment and they have no qualified water technicians. They got saved by the bell when the rains came, but this coming year is going to be quite dry. They're probably not going to do all that well. Could be hard for them. But yeah, I mean, the other two chapters left in the book are big war with the very sort of devious, sexy nonsense with not actual sex, just sort of like Machiavellian political shenanigans, where they went absolutely hammer and tongs against the Fransman Plus for like a year in the Western Cape for like no other reason than you will not criticize our mismanagement and corruption. That is off the table. And then there's a whole thing on Johannesburg where I try my very, very best to work out whether R1 trillion that it will cost to save the city. And I couldn't find R1 trillion in water, but I found, like, looking at the infrastructure as a whole, the stuff that is expiring, what they really need is between 700 billion and 2 trillion, anywhere between there. I'd hedge my bets on the lower end of that spectrum, to be perfectly honest. It's just that, depending on how much they try and expedite the process, and how much they really want to do, it could be. But it's a lot of money either way, and it's enough that if the national government takes it on, it could cause a fiscal crisis almost immediately. And if they don't take it on and something goes pop, because the worse the infrastructure gets, the faster it gets worse, because it costs money to like constantly patch leaks all the time. And as the infrastructure ages out, those leaks are just going to start showing up really, really rapidly. Faults, all kinds of problems. And so I think it's going to accelerate in Johannesburg. It's going to get really hard. Helensela might be able to slow the decline a little bit, but it's kind of inevitable. I think she's buying enough time that they can consolidate 2029. Because if they can consolidate 2029, they're in good standing. But there's one variable they can't control, which is, is the ANC going to have a controlled demolition under Patrice Motsepe, or are they going to have let's put it this way, a dark renewal under Paul Mashatile, reunifying with the MK and or the EFF? Though probably not. I mean, Malema's a little bit too volatile and temperamental. There's a good chance of that reunion coalition coming back together. And then what do you got? That's the end of the DA's utility, because you've got your doomsday coalition. The worst has happened. The worst conceivable end that we had to stab our constituents in the back for and do nothing in government about has happened. And will the world end overnight? I actually don't think so. I think that things will get ugly, but it's not going to go full Zimbabwe overnight. It's going to drag on for another decade, even with the fiscal crisis. But you'll see some notable economic shocks, price shocks. things happening, it would look pretty. It'll be pretty gnarly. Um, so yes, you know what? I'm going to quickly do the questions that I've gotten so far, and then I'm going to log off because I don't want to spend too much time on this. It is. I had a late night last night, and I don't want to do a 4 hour stream like I did last time. Anyway, hello, good evening, hi. Um, everyone's greeting me and being very friendly. That's nice. Okay, looking for questions, not so much comments. Labor law is too much protection. Yeah, I think that is safe to say. Taking Ambrosini's comments on Cyril's boiling frog plan as true, is there no sure Fabian link? There's pretty definitely a Fabian link. So Thabo Mbeki is definitely like a third wave Fabian socialist. Just go back in his speeches. He talks about the third way. He mentions a lot of big buzzwords that the Fabian Society were on about in that period. Public-private partnerships, and tracking, performance tracking, growth. All of that sort of glowy stuff. And Silva Maposa was recruited into the Fabian offshoot Common Purpose in 1999, as was Kuben Naidu of the South African Reserve Bank. This is in Julia Middleton's book that she made in 2007. She was tasked with putting this organization together by John Prescott of the Labour Party in the UK. It now has bases in about 200 countries worldwide, although it is opaque. Judging from what I hear from, both from people who are in the movement, in this organization and elsewhere, is that if you're an ordinary person, most of what they do is they just get you into government institutions for training and so on. So prisons, schools, hospitals, administration buildings, everything. And it's just like, learn this. Here's a job opportunity. Here's how you climb up. Here's how you become a leader, and so on. And I suspect that there's a slow winnowing of people who are not right thinking or not talented enough or whatever. So it's a very, very big sort of talent recruitment pool and influence vector. And that's how I see it, right? They've got most of the UK Metro Police, and you can find members of Common Purpose in funny places like the South African Judicial Ethics Committee and the governing board in our boards in our universities and so on. So it's got deep reach. But the thing is, I don't actually think the Fabians do a lot of people who are a bit conspiratorial. They think in terms of like command and conquer, like you've got instructions from your master. I don't think that's really accurate. You've got to see it as more like a club, more like a sense of common feeling. And the ideas don't always align 100%. It's just that, if you're in this club, you're likely to have this vibe to you. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the realistic way to think about the Fabian Society is that it's important to understand the history, just so that you can perceive the degree to which they have succeeded. Because I think they actually succeeded beyond their own benefit, to the point that they've so saturated the air that we breathe in the former British colonies that, I mean, because they even controlled a good portion of the Indian, this sort of separatist movement in the post-war period. I think the thing with them is that their ideas have become so stock standard, and they shared them at a high level with the American progressives throughout that whole sort of like late 19th, early 20th century period. There was a sort of establishment consensus. I think it's just sort of like that's become the air we breathe. And to talk about them being the ones pulling the strings, yeah, if you're in the Fabian Society, you're going to have a lot of fast friends in the UK. I don't know how useful it would be in South Africa. I do know that there are reasonable ties between very high-ranking Fabians and some very dodgy British people and several members of the Democratic Alliance. For example, Ryan Coetzee and Mark Burke both worked for the Liberal Democrats at the same time in the UK. And the guy who was sort of fixing it for them was Peter Mandelson. And again, those high-ranking Fabians very chat regularly, do a lot of visits. So, but I don't see it as like people taking instruction so much as like a networking amongst people who are just, they have common values. So I think that would be the best way to see it. It's just networking, and they're not going to pick the morons, regardless of what you think of, Mark Burke having landed with his bum in the butter. There's no doubt that he's a talented guy. And same for Ryan Coetzee. I mean, look, he does. I like to make fun of him for cocking up everything he's handled. But I've never met anyone who's spoken to him and thought he was a dunce. He's clearly... it's just, I suspect that he might have blinkers, a few blind spots. I mean, like we all do. It's just that, unfortunately, his blind spots happen to be part of what he does for a living. Anyway, so that's all I'm going to say on the Fabians. But the thing about the boiling frogs, the ANC does follow time schedules. And 25 years after 1994 is 2019. And sure as shit, that's when they start the second phase of the National Democratic Revolution. And it was drafted jointly by the plan was drafted jointly by Ramaphosa and Zuma in 2012, which is also around the same time that the share of the national wealth tipped 50-50 white and black. It's now more like 30-70, leaning black. Although I think that a lot of the old white business networks are still in control, in the sense that they can maneuver better than anyone else. They've got some access to foreign capital lines and things like that. So as much as BEE has displaced them, I think the old white elite, the permanent oligarchy, they do have a lot more clout than the top ticker tape will give them credit for. So, boiling frogs, anyway. Now let me see. The ANC, for the most of the time, and the DA all the time, are globalist. Both moving in the same direction, but at different speeds, and as herdmen for different herds. From sideline opinions, I would say that's very eloquently put, and I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Herdsmen for different herds. Quite. And then I answered the question about the leaked video from Stellenbosch. A DA mismanaging property sales, and so, oh my goodness. Just after I released, finished typing the book, releasing it and everything, Kevin Bloom comes out with this amazing scoop on Cape Town Property Management Committee? Property Planning Committee. There we go. The Planning Committee. And basically showing, crooked relationships. There's an attempt to circumvent the law to give them tenure for life. Very interesting stuff. So yeah, I wish I'd included that, but it happened after I published the book. What can I do? At some point, I got to pinch the bloody thing off. Looks like the DA is probably going to be left holding the bag in Joburg. Yeah. Do you know what this... As angry as I've been with Helen Zille for the past few years, there's part of me that kind of feels pity for her, because it's like, if she was heading for this kind of like failure when she was 50, I would rub it in her face every day. But like, I'm starting to get this sort of like this sort of sad feeling of pity about what she's going to face, because If you reach the end of your life and you've worked your whole life for this thing, and like right in your last opportunity to do any good, it just turns to shit in your hands. And she'll have to stick out those 5 years knowing that she's holding onto a big bag of shit. And that she's going to have to retire with everyone looking at her like, what did we waste the last 20 years of our lives for, politically speaking? And I think when the DA hits that dead end, there's going to be talk about, I'm not going to call it soul searching, because I don't think they're going to do that. I think some people are just going to get really, really cynical, nihilistic, and self-interested. And before that moment hits, I think the good people are going to probably step down. Someone says, Mr. Kwanzam 6891. Your solutions seem very interesting. However, the state still has extreme capability of violence, and the only way to combat it is through numbers and land, both things Afrikaners don't have. Very interesting point, although I wouldn't say numbers and land. I would say territory and capital. And capital in the broad sense, the way that Marx uses it, and that, it's not just money, it's like machinery and stuff you own that are the means of production. And, Afrikaners have got a couple opportunities to build some fairly strong, stable nodes across the country that they can really, really defend. So here in the Boerland is a good one. Orania is another. Pretoria is another. I really wish they would do it for Nelspruit just because of its strategic importance geographically. But I don't know. That's going to happen. It's an excellent place, and they've got like a couple of really like talented little nodes of people working and living there, which they could do so much with those people. Anyway, my solutions are like, they're all me trying to reach for ways to accelerate the process of accelerate the centrifugal forces as much as possible, and without dying in the process, of course. But when you say the state has extreme capacity of violence, you don't ever want to be the guy who makes the first move, and you want to have to be very cautious. If the in future are very clever and very cynical, they'll go back to old ANC tactics. And now I recall what the ANC did in Bisho, in Saskai, in 1993. Cyril Ramaphosa led a crowd of thousands of people. It wasn't a small crowd by any means. Led them from townships in white South Africa into black townships in white South Africa, what they used to call black spots, into the Ciskei homeland, which was acting as a foreign country administratively and so on. They get these people storming in on them. The guys manning the border had machine guns, and people in the crowd were told to the gun. They opened fire, and they hit about 300 people, and they killed about 50. And there's cameramen there, and there's all this, and they pull back. You should go look it up, a Bisho massacre. See if you can find this. There's an interview with Cyril Ramaphosa, and there's a little twinkle in his eye when he says, I think this was a great day. It was very successful. We got what we wanted. And I mean, like the Ciskei government melted like butter against this challenge. No one's coming to save them. You ask yourself, like, how do you react to that? How do you react to that? Now, the right circumstances, you just gun them down, like the Indians, right? In Phoenix. You had pogroms. Everyone has just quietly forgotten about this. It's been very convenient. I mean, look, people involved remember very vividly, and every now and again you get a reminder onto it. Part of the way that Zuma mobilized his supporters was to reach out into the community and sort of instigate pogroms against whites and Indians, but whites and Indians are well armed. So they try this near Phoenix, which if you look on a sort of census dot map, it's very Indian and not very well off. Like not poor, but it's like, lower middle class at best, right? It's all right. They're doing all right by South African standards, not great by international standards. Anyway, you have huge crowds of black people pitch up, and the WhatsApp groups are talking about invading people's homes, raping their women, killing them, burning their stuff. And the Indians do not hold back. They just fire. They kill about 300 people. And just because of the chaos and the extremity of the situation, there's been an unspoken agreement across the whole country. Yeah, we're not going to look into this. Just leave it be. Don't scratch that wound. And I have a suspicion that, look, if things happen correctly, if the right tone is struck, you can get away with these things, but you have to be very careful. You have to kind of get lucky, I think, in some ways. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if white people will be too house trained to defend themselves when the moment comes or not. Could a potential coloured vote signing with the Fraser Plus in the Western Province influence DA policy to the right? It could, but it's not going to, because any coloured person who wants Cape independence or wants to represent themselves, they're joining Gayton McKenzie, and Gayton McKenzie is about containing Cape independence. Everyone who's stuffing his pockets wants Cape independence to fail. So, yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid so. So, there are a smattering of conservative colours in Fraser Plus, but their reach is limited. Someone said, you've said you've said the Fraser Plus, and I've seen it myself in real time, have the perfect tools to counter these globalist policies. What do they look like? Oh, what? I'm having a stroke. Yeah. So, the Fraser Plus, the big thing that they have going for them is that they're against public-private partnerships. They are very staunchly for Afrikaner interests. They are for breaking up South Africa, at least in their manifesto, although honestly, I don't know how seriously they're taking that. It's very hard to tell, because they'll defend their manifesto and say, yes, of course we're serious, but then you kind of got to go, but like everyone says that. Well, they have to. So I look at this and I kind of go, like, I support, I vote for them. I'll vote for them because, it's worth it to have the chance, but I don't know how, do you know what I mean? Anyway, but yeah, they don't do public-private partnerships. Look at Peter Groenewald. He insources everything that he can, and he jettisons any unnecessary services or staff. So it's streamline and insource. So you get rid of these public-private partnerships that build cronyism and corruption. The DA is all about everything is public-private partnerships now. We're going to privatize everything, and then everything's going to be on contract with a private company who doesn't actually have to meet much of the criteria of quality and standards to actually, turn a profit off their of co-investment in any infrastructure project with the state, because the rules related to public-private partnerships are very, very favorable. They are in most places actually around the world, because honestly, who's going to invest in a government if you can have the rug pulled out from underneath you? It's risky. Anyhow, I would love to know what the behavioral insights team nudge unit is up to in South Africa recently. They had a heavy hand in the GBV narrative review. Really? Somehow I had not picked up on that. You've just given me an interesting new thread to tug on. Thanks for that. Very interesting. Sorry, I didn't know an answer to that. I really want to look that up now. Long March to ANC collapse and brace for impact. Daniel Simon Perez says, "Would you move to America if you had the chance?" I mean, there will come a point at which where it becomes more and more attractive as an idea, but I feel it's so undignified to take the refugee route. A lot of people are doing it. I mean, okay, I say a lot, but it's not that many. But I'd feel so ashamed of myself if I did that. You know, not because like, okay, there aren't, some good reasons to do it. It's just, I mean, it feels like giving up on one hand, but it also, if you give up because you went to America as an immigrant in like a normal right, just like, well, I walked through the gates with some self-respect. That's walking through as a refugee doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. But absolutely, I would feel miserable, and I probably wouldn't talk to anyone about my old life ever again. I'd be ashamed of it if I did that. I'm not saying it's impossible for me to do it but I don't want to. You know, like, for example, the wife. The wife's not a political personality. She's a very fundamentalist, very well-grounded Christian lady who likes open spaces and freedom and nature and good vibes. And yeah, I think she'd really enjoy America. I think it would give great opportunity to my children. My grandfather's American. Maybe I could go to Syracuse and pick up, their red, white, their orange, blue hockey jersey, and sort of, I don't know. I'm being very silly now. It's honestly, I'd really like to live somewhere, very rural if I ever went there. I don't know. It just makes me sad thinking of going to America. I mean, look, America seems like a lovely place in many ways, but I don't know. What would it mean? What would it mean for me? It's also like, starting over again, trying to become an expert in American politics when it's like the most saturated political commentary market in the world. I mean, sure, but who would be interested in listening to, like, me comment about American politics and getting stuck into, okay, here's what's happening in, this local branch of flipping whatever. I mean, imagine I took the same approach I did with the Cape Independent to, like, I don't know, Georgia or something, where I'm just focused on, okay, here's what's happening in the county, here's what's happening in the state, here's what's happening in the, House and everything. And because America's got enormously interesting, complicated subsidiarity in their government, and I don't know. I think I don't think I could really compete with the American market, to be perfectly honest. I think especially because it's so patronage based, and like, I know in South Africa that nobody really wants to hear. Not everyone really wants to hear what I have to say. There's a select group of people who come to me for advice or pay me for reports. But the uncle, I burned those bridges years and years ago, long before I realized that being a professional would be in my best interest. I'm a very silly, hot-tempered man. Anyway, my problem is I speak my mind. And I don't mean that as a sort of complimentary thing. One should always be shrewd. And I hope my son learns to be shrewd. It would be a silly bugger like me. But, what's done is done, and it gives me a little bit of freedom at the end of the day to say what I want. I know what the nudge unit is, Mr. Lowbrow. My question is the connection with South Africa. DA must still bake the prize-winning cake they brag with, and ingredients of black majority. Whoa, okay, that's a. Let me read that whole thing again. The DA must still bake the prize-winning cake they brag with ingredients of a black majority and various other minorities. Nobody has been able to pull it off yet. I think I know what you mean. And I think it might be the general thrust of my book, which is that, as they try and bridge the gap between white and black, it's like legs stretching as the icebergs part, remember Steenhuisen, when he went out, he said, we shouldn't bother appeasing our white base. We don't need them. We should just open ourselves up to black votes completely. Not going to work out. I think the people whose IQs are above room temperature in the party know that it's not quite the moment for that. Mr. Kwanzaa, 6891. Best solution would be to create a secret covert military that is actually threatening to the state and then negotiate. Well, no. You don't do that. Because you never ever wanted press on the state's jugular vein, ever, under any circumstances, unless you're much bigger than that state. So what you would really want to do is create a situation where it's impossible for them to actually exercise control, and then say, we'll cooperate if you'll give us this. That's more realistic, because if you just stay beyond their grasp and whack them on the fingertips if they try and reach out to you, that's different from going for the jugular vein. It's too dangerous to do that. And there's a long time before South Africa is going to be as decrepit as that. Zimbabwe isn't that decrepit, So I think always be very, very cautious. Just make it not worth their while to come and enforce law on you. Daniel Alpha November. Dan. I think coloureds are getting long in the tooth with Gayton. The Mr. PR Opportunity Act is getting quite stale. Just my anecdotal experience. Thanks for writing the book, Rob. Yes. Remember, it's in the description. The link is below there. So if you haven't gotten it yet, go get it now and buy me some stuff. Although Amazon is very annoying, because apparently I only get to see the revenue 60 days after the end of the month in which the purchases occurred. So whatever you pay now, get in September, end of September. So investment. It's a good investment. I don't know about what you're saying with coloureds. I don't know if it's true or not, because I've seen some smarty pants people that I know going and joining them. Now, again, this is one of those things I don't know about. I know the DA are a little bit jittery about him. Now, what I'm saying is not that, okay, Gayton McKenzie's growing, he's going to absorb everything. No. I think he's going to hit a ceiling. I've talked about this a few times before, about this sort of coloured identity ceiling that sits at about 12% of I think 10 to 12% is my estimate for its range of the Western Cape vote. And the thing about that is, well, Gayton McKenzie's heading for saturating that market. I mean, he's squeezing into the Cape Coloured Congress. He's squeezing into Patricia de Lille's Good Party. And he's absorbing some of those conservative phrase from Plus voters who entertained the party briefly. And he's absorbing a few DA votes, and a lot of ANC votes. But I mean, you look at there was a by-election in George, 2 by-elections, 2 wards, and if you look at that data and you just check out absolute number of votes, percentages, the DA grew in those 2 areas as a percentage by 9 percentage points. And if you look at the amount of voters, in absolute numbers in a nice little chart, you can see exactly where they moved. Now, the parties who represent coloreds, there's a slightly lower turnout, but part of that is because the Good Party and plaaslik besorgde inwoners didn't feel the candidate, and both of those are like very, very brown parties. So the PA, by showing up in those for those by-elections, got an easy win by scooping up that constituency. But it's not growth. I think it's just that colored identity bubble is consolidating nicely, and Gayton's taking most of it. But it's not new. Patricia did a little one about this much back in, what was it, like 2009, 2006? I can't remember what election it was that she scooped so much, but it was then. Anyway, sideline opinions saying privatize everything by selling all the most profitable ones to foreign companies. Well, don't depress me. My explanation of the nudge unit was for the benefit of the chat. I figured you would likely know. Yeah. Well, I don't want to go too much into detail on foreign stuff in this this thread, but they are definitely worth a look up for anyone who doesn't know what the nudge unit is. And there's a lot written on them, both for very serious people and for casuals. So yeah. Oh yes, here we go. What I meant was the DA brags with Western Cape municipalities where black people are not the majority. Yes, this is true. They also do this thing of saying, which I mentioned in the book, that they're the most diverse party in the country because they have 14% of them are black, but only 4% of the black community vote for them. Now, there's something I didn't include in the book because I thought it might be a bit too pejorative. But there's something in like statistical circles, and I believe it came from the Bay Area. He was talking about something he calls the lizard man constant. And that's it when you do like these big sort of opinion polls on various things. You always get a small percentage of people who just screw with the interviewer and write random nonsense. And somebody actually included a question in a poll, which is, do you believe that the world is run by alien lizards from the Andromeda galaxy? Like David Icke stuff, right? And they got 4%. Yeah, why not? And so he thought the idea is like, okay, 4%, that's the lizardman constant. Anything that's below 4%, you can dismiss. So, I mean, look, Vryheidsfront Plus aren't quite in that area. They've got about, somewhere between 12 and 15% of white support. So that's not quite the lunatic fringe. But if your black support is like 4% or under, it's getting to that guy's like, okay, these guys are definitely quirky and unusual for within their community. Let's say it but that way. And they do pick up, if you look at the black people who vote DA, they do tend to be a lot more educated and a lot more better paid than their counterparts, and they tend to have private sector ties. They tend to come from certain universities, and so it's a sliver of the black population that's very different. And there are some lower income supporters. This is true, but they tend to be the black equivalent of, I don't know if you meet those sort of German people who are like very, very pro-immigrant, they can be a bit slightly too ingratiating. And I sort of think, well, look, I'm glad that you're friendly and all that, but I need a bit of resistance when I'm having a political discussion, a little bit of. So the black equivalent of white liberals, black liberals. Actually, it's the same thing. Yeah. I just don't like people who are too cuddly. I'd prefer people who've got a bit of bite in them. Anyway, last couple of questions, and I'm going to bloody go, guys. So yeah, what's the relationship between coloreds and whites in South Africa? That's a good question. Is it similar to Hispanics and whites? Well, now you're asking me the hard question. I mean, what is the relationship between Hispanics . No, it's I mean, look, colored people are partly white. They're also part. It's sort of like jeepers. Every time I try and reach for a comparison in America, it's like it only works halfway. So, like the native reserves are like the Bantustans, but black politics is nothing like Native American politics. And then it goes on and on and on. Like anytime you find a point of comparison, it's half cut with something that's unrelated. Like colored people are mostly from the indigenous people of the Cape, right? In the rest of the country, you've got settlers from the rest of Africa came down. They too have a large portion of Khoi blood in them. So they've been here for about 1,500 years, roughly, in South Africa. Up north in Limpopo, it's longer. It's like 2,000 years. And the Bantu expansion was a slow process. It was a very slow process of settlement. And so black people in South Africa largely will have between like a quarter and a third, especially like the frontier populations like the Xhosa and the Tswana. They'll have like a third of their genetic material will be Khoi. And then people in the Cape, anything from, a quarter to 80% or 90%. And then going into Namibia, you get these very full, pure blood Khoi people who still speak native languages. Like, for example, Kwekwekobab, it's got 100,000 speakers. It's not a huge linguistic community. It's smaller than Iceland, but they have their own dictionary, they have their own schools. They're kind of survivalizing. So the Cape population, they've also got Malay blood, which it's actually a misnomer. Most of it's Indonesian. And then there is some sort of not Khoi, Xhosa blood mixed in, and then a fair amount of Dutch blood and English blood. So the Cape Colored community is a mix, and then they're sort of dragged between different poles. So it's I wouldn't even say a quarter. I'd say just under a fifth of them are Muslim, and they tend to be more predominantly Indonesian or Malay, as they're called, in their background. They tend to be more upper middle class. They tend to dominate a lot of the community stuff, and then the rest will be Christian. And depending on where you're from in the community, they tend to get on well or not. Amongst the last people get horizontally line, but when there's the additional problem of like some class barrier, then it can get a bit intense. There's also like people will lean more pro-black or more pro-white. And it's complicated. So how colored people relate to white is based on like, do they from which part of the community? So you get people who are very, very Afrikaans, but as they go, how should I put it? As you go up the social hierarchy, colored people tend to be more English, and they tend to be more pro-English. And with that comes exposure to progressive ideas and all kinds of stuff. But as you go down the scale, while they will become more Afrikaans, they'll also become more crudely materialist in the sense of we need stuff and we need services now. And so that can often result in very, very harsh resentment of white people. But broadly speaking, the relationship it's just a complicated one, where even colored people who have very strong resentments against white people will be more willing to hear you out and what you've got to say than a black person was. If a black person decides that they don't really like what white people have to say, there's like this absolute wall in here. And even if they're going to be polite with you, it's a wall. They're not hearing you. So I think the thing is that, colored people, because of their shared ancestry, can often have like ambivalent feelings, one way or the other, and sometimes they can be extreme in one way or the other. And you can often find colored people who'll do the sort of white is all right thing and say, well, actually, people should be in charge and so on. There's not a huge amount of them, but they exist. And broadly speaking, one of the things that I've noticed about colored people is they do respect you more if you're blunt with them about where you stand, and they don't like the liberal thing of being told, oh no, you don't understand, but yeah, I agree, you guys need more of this and that and the other. And they'll kind of agree with it, but they don't trust it. Does that make sense? So a big thing with them is trust. There's a lot of political paranoia. They haven't had their own political representatives for like since the 19th century. And so they're very used to getting trust you unless they would sooner trust you if they think that you're going to be at least a little bit racist. It's a funny sort of thing. I mean, in the political realm, that is. In interpersonal life, things get different. It's more complicated then, but at a political level. Yeah, the paranoia is big. So why did the NP decide to treat colored people in such a way, since there used to be some cooperation in the Cape before apartheid was implemented? Oh, that's a difficult one. I think it grew over time as anti-apartheid activism grew. During the 80s, as the sort of the reforms were setting deeper in, some policemen started acting out really badly, and you got I think it was the Trojan Horse massacres, where they had got like some stupid bloody policeman riding into a colored neighborhood and just shooting people for no good reason. It's a big scandal. Very, very, very strongly remembered by that community, with good reason. It's an absolutely pointless, stupid thing to do. Absolute waste of life. But for a long time, they had something called the so the Western Cape, this province, used to be a place where you couldn't hire in black people who didn't already live here. And there was a very small but non-zero contingent of black people settled in the Cape, came from very long ago. And they kept it that way. They protected the Cape's character very assiduously until about 1985, and then they just threw it out the window for cheap labor. And there was a fair amount of colored people who did support the old system, but I dare say they were not the majority. And I think most people sort of, the thing is, a lot of them looked at the newcomers coming in and they thought, yeah, what's this going to look like? Are they actually going to treat us well? And one of the odd little features that happened was that the numbers gangs were offered a deal back in the day for protection. And Kuntu were the armed wing of the ANC, promised that they'd all be set free when the revolution came. And then the revolution came and they were not set free. And there were some very significantly deadly prison riots in 94. So, yeah, colored-black relations, complicated. Rob, would the corrupt not take out Helen Zille? She wings Joburg. No, why would they? She's not a real threat. Live to fight another day. You don't have to assassinate everyone who tries to come after you. She's not actually going to be running the police force. Chances of her reigning in the corruption and violence and stuff in Johannesburg is slim. They're going to catch a few people, but she's also going to know when to not press her luck. I mean, look at her right now. She could be attacking Cyril Ramaphosa for any amount of the enormous crimes that he's committed. She could be going after Thabo Mbeki for leading the arms deal scandal that Jacob Zuma is about to be prosecuted for. She doesn't, because she understands how the game's played. I don't think she's going to do anything that'll harm her, her family, or her party's interests, or her donors' interests for that matter. um, um, do you agree that there's a significant Jewish element within the DA and that this angle of investigation may be beneficial when you look at this tribe's increasingly sinister shenanigans? I don't think it's worth it. I don't think that's a valuable question to interrogate for a number of reasons. But primarily because it's much, much better. Let's just assume you're a fairly rabid anti-Semite, just for the sake of argument, right? If you were, why would you want to antagonize them? Think about what you're describing the nature of the world as. Why would you go and do that? You think you're winning? No. And if you're not an anti-Semite, you criticize the guys you don't like, and you leave the guys you do like alone. There's plenty of people who can be, and here's the thing: in South Africa, everyone is kind of treated by the black majority as white anyway, and so the best thing to do is to just follow your reasonable self-interest as you see fit, where you can go, and not get distracted by too much. I think, look, Jewish South Africans are fairly flexible, pragmatic people. And much like you've seen in the United States recently, there's been a shift from Jewish support from mostly Democrat leaning to being a bit more Republican. And I don't know how that's going to play out in the long run, because once you're in the Republican camp, you're sort of fighting a rearguard action. Anything that gets associated with the Republicans becomes under threat, really, from the rollout of political change. So I don't know if that was the smartest move, really, but in term context, right? Because I firmly believe that things do move leftward fairly consistently unless you stop them with very, very extreme executive power or with territorial separation. So as long as America can remain whole, it's going to become more left-wing, less white. It's just going to go that way. No one's stopping it. So Jews associating with the Republican Party, I think they're going to increasingly be sucked into the lager mentality that includes white people. I think that's going to keep happening. It's happening here to some degree too. Any prediction on how things are going to turn out in Venezuela? Not a clue. I've not looked at Venezuela at all for the past several years. I have no idea whatsoever. But yeah, on the whole sort of the point about Jewish people, I think I am someone who does think about ethnic politics a lot. And I've written twice about issues impacting the Jewish community from a sort of like theory perspective. I've written about a couple of news items when it was on the Cape Independent, but that was mainly when they were getting targeted by the EFF. And it was one of the biggest hit articles we did. When I got to the Herzliya school story just after the Jewish Post did, and then that took off got some attention. But look, I'm not someone who's like a big cheerleader for anyone, right? And nor am I someone who likes picking fights with anyone. Looking at black nationalists, even, or like a big boogeyman out here in South Africa, my perspective is they're actually doing the right thing. They're looking after their interest. Maybe it's not the smartest way of going about it, but in the broad sense that they're trying to do what's right for them, well, fair play. If you're looking after your interest, fair play to you. Don't do it excessively or stupidly, and it's fine, you know. And everyone's going to. There are chauvinists for every group. There's no point in being allergic to them, even if they hate you. It doesn't do you any good to obsess over any of this. So, like, people who get obsessed with, like, oh, the Jews have a problem with the goyim or whatever, don't get obsessed with it. Most important thing in all circumstances is to relax, I think. If you get excited about this stuff, you get bitter and twisted inside, you get paranoid, and you get silly. So don't do that. I mean, I think the biggest thing is to look at the distinction between Tony Leon and Helen Ziller, both Jewish members of the DA, both very, very different approaches. Tony Leon was more than willing to help Afrikaners lobby his own party and in the Department of Agriculture to try and fight John Steenhuisen's stupid and destructive policies. No, it's perfect. I mean, sure, maybe you can write it up as a commercial move. But Helen Ziller, she wouldn't have lifted a finger. So she doesn't regard that side as with any more respect than she has to, because she's a left-winger. She's a George Soros type. And the difference between her and Tony Leon is Tony Leon will come out and say something like, I think it's good to see Javier Milei in Argentina. I hope he can give libertarianism a good show, because I'm an economic liberal at heart. Helen Ziller will go on and say, I've never believed the market really ought to play a very big role in society. The state should lead all of our economic interests, allowing us to plan 60 years ahead for the direction in which the economy will be going. So Helen Ziller is one of those people who strangely thinks of liberalism as a stepping stone to global government communism. A world in which you can say what you like and you can vote for what you like, but it doesn't matter, because the global government will decide your economic policy, your social policy, everything. And you just get to sit back and, like you have a little brother who plays with like a controller that's cut off. If you go to a family that they got like different siblings competing and there's a little brother, he gets the controller that's not connected to the PlayStation. Helen Zeller's idea of the future is where every citizen has their own little PlayStation controller and you're allowed to press whatever buttons you like. That's how she sees it. Tony Leon still genuinely thinks, everyone deserves a fair shake, and so I like him. And there are these differences that if you get too obsessed with wherever you're coming from, you're not going to be able to find agents as vectors for your interests in society, and there are crucial moments in which you're going to have to use them. Right? That's you can get really, really paranoid, or you can accept that you're going to have to work with people of various shades and just be practical about it. Now, I know there might be some Jewish people listening who might be getting sensitive about this because I haven't been very heilig about it, but I'm not very heilig about anything. If someone's very anti-white, from any side of the fence, it doesn't matter, because it's like, okay, well, are they a threat? Are they going to stab me now? No. So we get on with life. Are they going to support something I don't like politically? Okay, then I'll say, yeah, I don't like that. It's the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, That's broadly sort of where I kind of go on any race relations. Is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if someone hates you or loves you or whatever. Does what they're doing suit your interests or not? That's how you got to think of it. And having a strong in-group feeling, as long as it doesn't get insane, it's a very good thing, because then you can have people who share your values and your lifestyle, who will reproduce the community life that you feel comfortable in, and find where you're comfortable and stay there. It's not complicated. Anyway, I think that's enough for tonight. Yeah. Goodbye. Buy the book.